Hine ma tov u'manayim, shevet achim gam yachad. How good it is for us to be together in this room after all we've been through. I greet you with a whole heart, and I rejoice with you that our synagogue is open again at last. What a terrible period we have gone through. We have seen the entire world united by one fear. We have seen millions of people of the United States driven from their jobs, driven from their streets, and imprisoned in their homes by a virus that is so small that you cannot see it with the naked eye. And we are bewildered and confused and even traumatized by what we have lived through and are living through. We grieve for the myriads of people whom we know have perished in this plague. Never in our lifetimes have we gone through anything at all like this pandemic. And we are still living with apprehension and with insecurity and unease because we know that it could come back again. This is the mood with which we come into the synagogue on this Kol Nidre. A few years ago, we worried about whether our services would be safe from terrorists, and we set up guards at the entrance to search our bags, and we set up machines at the entrance to search for hidden metal. Now we worry about whether our lives will be safe from a disease for which searching bags will do no good and machines will be of no use. A few years ago, we measured our success by whether we could fill every seat in the synagogue. This year, we worry about whether it is safe to sit next to each other 6 feet apart. A few years ago, we worried about what dress or what suit we would wear for Yontif. This year, we worry if we have a mask with us. Last year, we sent each other Shana Tova cards. This year, I read that sympathy cards outsell every other kind of greeting card in the store because we have lost so many people, and there's so many we need to comfort. No one can predict the future, but it looks like the worst of this dreadful period is over, and that the world will be safe again. But an experience as horrible as this one has been should not be allowed to disappear without teaching us some lessons in how to live. And so what I want to do is share with you one simple lesson that I hope we will take away from this ordeal and that will teach us how to live from now on. I want to share with you a lesson that comes out of 2 stories from the ancient past. The first story is one that many of you probably know already, for it appears in the Yom Kippur afternoon service. The second story is one that you probably have never heard before because it appears in only one rare passage in the Talmud. But I believe if we study these stories together, and that if we study events that take place in our time, we will find a lesson that can guide us in how to live in the years ahead. Let me begin with the story that is found in the Yom Kippur service. Rabbi Jacob Reamer recounts it in this way. In the early afternoon, when many of us are tired, we come to the Avodah service. And in this service, we recall step by step by step the ritual that was carried out on this day in the time when the Holy Temple still stood. We retell the story of how the Kohen Gadol atoned 3 times, first for himself and for his own sins, then for his fellow Kohanim and for their sins, and then for the whole house of Israel and their sins. And then we retell the story of how he took 2 animals that looked almost exactly alike, and he sacrificed one to atone for the holy place and for all the sins that were committed in its name, and the other was driven off to be a scapegoat for the sins of all the people. And then we tell the story of how the Kohen Gadol entered the Holy of Holies and what he did there. And that is the climax of the Avodah service. And if I were to ask you, who is the star of the Avodah service? If I were to ask you, I am sure that many of you would know. The star of the Avodah service is the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. The Avodah service tells of how he practiced his part with the priest the day before so that he would not make a mistake. And it tells of how they kept him awake the night before, teaching him and drilling him and rehearsing him in preparation for this day. And it tells of how the Kohen Gadol put on white garments, which he wore only on this day. And it tells of how he walked from his home to the temple, and it says that thousands of people assembled in the streets of Jerusalem to cheer him on and to wish him well and to see how beautiful he looked in his pure white garments. And then it says that when he arrived at the holy temple, he went into the Holy of Holies, that was a place so sacred and so special that no one else ever went in there except the Kohen Gadol. And he only went in there on the holiest day of the year. The Avodah service says that the Kohen Gadol only stayed in the Holy of Holies for a very short time. During this time, he spread incense over the Holy of Holies, which caused a pillar of smoke to rise up so that he would not see the room. And then he carried out the last sacrifice of the day. He did it step by step, down to the last detail, precisely according to the law. And then he uttered a short prayer on behalf of the people of Israel, whom he represented. And then he came out of the Holy of Holies. And when he came out, a great cheer arose from the crowd that was waiting for him. And as he walked back to his home, an enormous crowd of people stood on the streets of Jerusalem to congratulate him for having entered in peace and for having departed in peace. I have to tell you, I've watched the Oscars on television many times, and I've seen the stars arrive dressed in the most stylish clothing and jewelry, smiling at the photographers and waving at their fans as they walk down the red carpet. And I can tell you that there's no comparison at all between the behavior of the crowds at these two events. The reception that the Kohen Gadol received as he walked to and from the Holy Temple on Yom Kippur makes the entrance of movie stars on the red carpet seem like a walk out of the grocery store. As the Talmud says, anyone who was alive in that generation and who was privileged to be there and to see this pageant never forgot it. And that is why we retell the story of the glory of the Kohen Gadol every year in the afternoon of Yom Kippur. And as we do, we cannot help but feel the painful contrast between what once was and what now is. Once we had a holy temple in which God's presence dwelt. Now we don't. Once we had a Kohen Gadol who was able to win the favor of God for all his people by what he did in the Holy of Holies. Now we don't. Now we can only tell the story and hope that that will be a substitute for the sacrifice and that it will bring us favor in the sight of God. And now, let me tell you a second story that I must admit I had never heard before until I came across it this year in the writings of my teacher, and it moved me deeply. And so I resolved to tell it to you on this day. The story is found in Masechet Psachim. The passage deals with the question, if the Holy of Holies was so pure and so holy a place that no one was ever allowed to enter it except the Kohen Gadol, how did they keep it clean? Did they allow this holiest of all places to fall into disrepair? This is the answers that the sages give. The Talmud said that there was a trapdoor in the roof of the Holy Temple, which was located just above the Holy of Holies. And once every 7 years, they would lower some workmen down through this trapdoor by rope so that they could make whatever repairs and whatever cleaning had to be done there. And then these workers had finished their labors. They would give a tug on the rope, and the people on the roof would pull them up again. And when the day was done, these workmen would take their tools and go home, and no one made a fuss over them as they walked home. No one even knows their names. And the Talmud tells us one more detail about these workmen. It says that before they were let down into the Holy of Holies, before they began their work, these workmen were given special face masks. The Talmud says that these masks had blinders on both sides so that they could only face forward and so that they could not look around and see what was in this holy room. Talmud says that the workmen wore blinders because if they looked around and saw the Holy of Holies, they would die. What does that face mask that they wore remind you of? It reminds me of the protective mask that surgeons and nurses wear when they are in the emergency room or going into an operating room in our time. The workmen who entered the Holy of Holies once in 7 years in order to cleanse it and repair it wore face masks so that they would not desecrate the holiest place in the temple by looking around and therefore die. And the doctors and nurses who work in the operating rooms today wear face masks in our time so that they will not be infected by being too close to the patients whom they treat. They wear face masks because they know that one cough, one breath could cost them their lives. When you hear these two accounts, when you hear the story of how the Kohen Gadol was treated as he made his way to the Holy Temple to carry out his sacrifice, and how he was treated when he came home again after he had performed the service, and then you hear this story of how the workmen who repaired the Holy of Holies went home, do you notice the one great difference between these two events? The Kohen Gadol went to the temple and returned from the temple, surrounded by thousands of well-wishers. And the workmen who painted and cleansed and repaired the Holy of Holies, no one noticed them, no one cheered them on, and no one paid any attention to them. Not as they made their way to the Holy Temple, and not as they made their way back. I understand why the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, was treated with so much respect, because we treat movie stars the same way, and I understand why the workmen who cleansed and painted and repaired the Holy of Holies were ignored, because they weren't famous. This same pattern happens in our own time. All during the coronavirus, the President of the United States held a press conference almost every single day. He held it at prime time so that he would have the most listeners. He held it together with the Vice President and with a number of top scientists in the country standing at his side. And as soon as each conference was finished, the media held special wrap-up sessions in which they analyzed every word that the president had said and every word that the pandemic experts who stood with him had said. They discussed such questions as, did the president hint that the virus was going to end soon, or did he not? Did Dr. Fauci disagree with what the president said, or not? Did what he said today differ in any way from what he said the day before, etc., etc., etc.? We hung on every word that was said. We did so because we believed that they were experts and that they understood the ways of the virus better than we did. And that if we listened carefully to what they said, we would learn how to respond to the virus. But there was another group to whom most of us paid very little attention. We treated them the way our ancestors treated the workmen who repaired the Holy of Holies. I am thinking of those people who cleaned and scrubbed the subways every night between 1 and 5 in the morning so that those who go to work by subway every day could take hold of a pole without fear of contracting the disease. And I am thinking of those people who cleaned the operating rooms between every surgery so that it would be safe to use the room again, or those who scrubbed and cleaned the rest of the rooms in the hospital so that those who worked there and those who came to visit their loved ones might be safe. Or nurses who worked in the nursing homes, who moved from one room to another, who ran the risk of becoming contaminated every time they did, and yet showed up every day to care for those that are helpless and infirm. Without them, the death toll in our cities would have been much higher. And yet, for the most part, no one knows their names. Few give them any praise, and no one lines the streets to cheer them on as they make their way home from their jobs. And no one certainly has rewarded their courage and valor with higher wages or bonuses. If there is anything we ought to learn from this ordeal that we have been through, I believe that it is our obligation not only to honor the scientists and the epidemiologists and the leaders of government, as important as they are, but that it is our task to honor the manual laborers, the people whom no one seems to pay attention to, for they too played a vital and indispensable role in getting us through this ordeal. And therefore, we are going to do something that we have never done before, a very small gesture in the right direction. It is our custom in the synagogue to say thank you and to pay honor on Kol Nidre to those people who have served this congregation, our past presidents. They are honored with holding the Torahs for Kol Nidre, and they are the center of attention when we begin Yom Kippur. We do so because these people deserve to be appreciated for all that they have done and do to enable our synagogue to have a vital and vibrant school and have programs for young and the old. To put it simply, this synagogue could not exist without their generosity and commitment. We are going to do that again in years to come. But this year, I want to acknowledge in my sermon and focus the attention on the people who are seldom noticed in this synagogue. David Gonsalves, Larry Gonsalves, John Gonsalves, Shannon Silva, and Chelsea Cook. These people have put in many hours, not only in order to make this building look presentable on the high holidays, but to make this building safe from contagion so that we can pray here today and every Sabbath without fear. And those who are here in the sanctuary or walk into this building this day are as safe as possible. Unlike the workmen who repaired and cleansed the Holy of Holies and were then ignored, we know who you are and we are grateful to you. And now let me turn from talking to these people to talking to you. And let me ask you to do one good deed in this new year that has now begun, which perhaps you have never done before. I wish to suggest that you say thank you to the cashiers and thank you to those who put products on the shelves of your supermarket. We treat these people as if they were invisible. We treat them the way that the people of Jerusalem treated the workmen who repaired the Holy of Holies. We do not even know their names. For if it were not for them, our lives would have grounded to a halt, and even the most essential workers would not have been able to go to work. Friends, I have accustomed to focus on Kol Nidre, on some good deed that I ask you to observe during the new year. Sometimes I ask you to honor your parents, or to teach your children, or to give tzedakah to the hungry, or to support our congregation, or to pay attention to the sick and the weak in our community. I ask you to do all these things, for they are each important. But in addition to these good deeds, I want to ask you to add one more good deed this year. I want to ask you to pay attention to those people who have helped us get through this trying period. Those people with whom we would not have survived, whose names we don't know, whose faces we don't see. Those people whom we treat the way the people of Jerusalem treated the workmen who went in the Holy of Holies on this day, whose names they did not know. Those of you who watch the Oscars know that they give an award every year to the actor or to the actress in a supporting role. Let me suggest that we learn from what they do in Hollywood, that we give our thanks this year to all those people who did so much and who risked so much and were so brave in the supporting roles that they played. I ask you to say thank you to these people who deserve an honor for being the best actor in a supporting role, for they have supported us and they help and have helped us get through this difficult and dangerous year. May we say a well-deserved thank you to these people, and may God bless us for doing so. And let us all say, Amen.